Bum, bum, bum.
We are live.
Hello. Welcome to episode 19 of Books and Bourbon. Hard to believe our show is now a thriving teenager, soon to be past that and into the age of actually being able to drink. But I digress. I'm your host, Caleb Roth, also known as The Book Flipper. You can find me on social media at The Book Flipper. And I'm joined with my lovely two co-hosts, Matthew Osborne and David, actually at Dave Can Read, since that's his Twitter Insta handle. What's up, fellas? How are we doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
Wonderful.
Background's looking good as normal.
We try and do. People are going to get used to it. We're going to have to switch it, but we are excited to be here. So lots to talk about on today's pod. We're not going to waste a lot of time with an intro. I believe everybody is in their own homes/states this time around. Nobody's traveling, which is great. If you are watching the show live, drop us a note. Let us know where you're calling in or where you're listening in from. It's always fun to see. We've got someone from Canada, Seattle, Washington, so we'll be checking that out as well. Someone says, have you seen the recent Scoutly screen? Sincere flattery. Yes, it looks a lot like the IQ that we're all used to seeing. So glad you guys noticed that too. It wasn't just us dreaming. But again, if you're watching live, drop us a note. Let us know where you're from. We need to follow up on our bet real quickly before we introduce our guests. You guys remember we talked about what the peak textbook season was going to be, which is typically the 3rd/4th week of August. Let me go check my notes because Google Trends updated. So let me see what our notes were real quick. Okay, hang on one second, because I think there's a clear winner. All right, you guys remember the bet as I pull up a little quick scoreboard here?
I vaguely remember.
That was last episode. I don't think I was on that episode.
You put a bet on. This was a couple episodes ago. We had Mike, the used book guy.
I do remember that now.
Yeah, let me find.
I'd have to look that up. I can't remember what my bet was.
All right, I've got it all written down. I took notes from it. So let me share my screen. Let me walk through this. So this was Google Trends. We were trying to figure out because textbook season was going to take a hit thanks to COVID. So it was kind of dropping. And the question was that downtrend going to continue? Would we bounce back a bit? Would we bounce back a lot? So let me share my screen. This will be fun. For those of you commenting where you're from, this is awesome. Someone at the Dallas airport. So even though we're not traveling, someone else can be traveling, which is great. I'm just going to share my whole screen at the risk of anything popping up. Here we go. Okay. So Google Trends. I believe the term was textbooks, maybe textbook, but I think it was textbooks. We're looking last 5 years. So for those that, again, maybe not be familiar, and if you're watching the podcast, sorry, you can't see this live just yet. What this is, you can go to Google Trends or trends.google.com and type in the word textbooks, change the search parameter to past 5 years, and I'm using the United States, which would be the default setting. What it does is it shows the relative search popularity of terms over time. So 0 is no popularity. I think the lowest we see on this chart is maybe 10 to 11. 100 would be the highest. So it's all relative to itself. A lot of times when you get a trendy thing that happens, or if it just kind of, it pops and then becomes not hot again, you'll see a very common spike. Sometimes you'll see a general groundswell. Here we see just typical textbook patterns. So in the fall, in August/September, we see really high spikes. In January, we see a little bit smaller spike. So the spikes in August/September tend to get as high as 90 to 100. That's when the big textbook season is. You can see the last 2 to 3 years, well, really 2 years since COVID, the fall spike, let's just say it out loud for those that can't see it live. 2018 was 95, so almost as good as it gets. 2019 actually got all the way to 100. If I can get my mouse to actually cooperate, but I know it's 100. 2020, so the first year of COVID, it peaked out at 82, which makes sense. A lot of students weren't in school. The next year, 2021, it kept going down. So we kind of connect the top of these peaks. We're seeing a trends. Oh, it doesn't like me. Let me pick. Here we go. We got it down to 68. And so we put a bet on air in terms of what would happen. And here's what we came up with. So I bet that this year, 2022, we get up to 85. We'd actually get farther north of where we were. David bet 83. Mike, the used book guy, bet 81, and Matthew was our low ball. He's kind of the dollar guy if we're going to use the Price is Right analogy. But Matthew put 79. Now, Google's still flushing this out. We may have to come revisit it. But as of the third week of August, the textbooks trend relative to the last 5 years was 73. So Matthew is closest, although technically we all went over. So how does 73 stack up? I think we were at 68 a year ago. So 73 is a little bit higher relative search volume, but not much. So we didn't recover past where we dropped to in 2020. We did bounce back from 2021, but just a little bit. So Matthew, you're the big winner. We'll send you a t-shirt or something. But before we bring our guest in, how does that info grab you? Is that kind of what we were expecting?
I'm curious if we look at that in like a week or two, if they continue to adjust the numbers from last month, or if it's like set in stone as soon as it rolls over to the next month. I'm curious if those are like the final numbers or not.
TBD. I know they had like a dotted line as of a couple days ago, so I think it probably updates.
Oh, okay.
The fact that it's solid right now may mean it's locked in, but we'll revisit. Maybe there's still a chance that David or myself can sneak into the lead, but perhaps no. So what does that mean? Textbooks have bounced back a little from last year, but maybe not as up as we'd like to see. So maybe there is a general downtrend when it comes to textbooks. That would tend to make sense. Just in terms of college enrollments are starting to decline. There's a lower population going into college, and textbook publishers are getting sneakier and sneakier about online type texts, etc. So real quick, Dave, Matthew, or either one of you, Dave Matthews, we should have a band. Either one of you,
do it.
Any comments on textbook season? We did see a little bit of a bump personally, maybe a 25% bump off of our normal 30-day sales. But again, I don't really specialize in textbooks anymore. I kind of steer clear with the lawsuits. And so my business doesn't usually get a huge bump, but I think 25% is where we're going to land up. David, are you somewhat similar to that?
Yeah, I was going to say that's like pretty much right on, like pretty close to what we experience. Pre-COVID, we always counted August and January as like 1.3 times sales, so about a 33 or 30% bump. But this year, it was definitely stronger than last year. I know the search doesn't, or the Google Trends doesn't really show it, but we did see a pretty big bump. Like you would see pronounced like sales days. I'm sure you saw Monday and Tuesdays were, peaks. Whereas last year, again, it was just kind of like, it was just like a small little bump, So yeah, really exciting.
Cool. All right. Well, without too much further ado, we're going to introduce our 19th episode guests. This is already a famous individual. He probably doesn't want to claim that, but he was one of the original cast of the 100 Book Challenge. And so it's kind of fun to have the crew back together. So without further ado, let's introduce John Troutman. John, welcome to the show. Glad to have you.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Glad to be back. All this back together.
I think that since the time we've left, I picked up a little gray in the beard. You don't look a day older than when you left Colorado.
I don't think he does either.
Well, I work with college students now, so I try to look younger. So I've been going to the tanning bed and dyeing my beard hair, doing all those things. No, Perfect. Not at all, actually.
Well,
none of that.
Well, maybe all those kids are reverse aging you. Who knows?
It's just because I shaved. When I let this grow out, they always are like, dude, you have so much white hair. Thanks a lot, guys.
Apparently it's a good thing, but I still haven't come around to believe it. So, well, cool. Well, when we last left you, you were in Colorado. We'll get to your story. We'll kind of fill that in. Where are you calling in from now?
I'm in Boone, North Carolina, the home of Appalachian State University.
Beautiful. And since I'm a Michigan State fan, I just have to bring it up. Pretty sure App State had a pretty good win 10, 15 years ago over the University of Michigan, if memory serves me.
Somewhere around 2007.
Give or take. That was one of the bigger upsets at the time in the sporting world, and it's always good to see our little brother get beat. But I will stop. I know there's Michigan fans on the show. We don't want to alienate anybody.
Yeah, we actually are going to take a trip to Michigan here in a couple weeks, and we're going to stop by Ann Arbor, I think, and go by the stadium and take pictures with our app shirts on. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully somebody will take our picture.
You probably want to update your life insurance policy before you do that.
For sure.
Cool. Well, for those that aren't familiar, if you want to kind of fill back in, we'll get the 30,000 foot view, but you can check out John's story and kind of how he got started in books. So for those of you that are early to the game or newish, you can check that out. Matthew's got it ready, I'm sure, but the100bookchallenge.com. 100 is just the numbers 100. So you can check that out. Matthew actually went side by side with John. They had two different business models, and we tracked their numbers weekly to show kind of what is possible, how long it takes for inventory to start selling, and lots of good tips. And it's 100% free. You can check that out. There's some cool spreadsheets and all kinds of other gadgets for you. So check that out. You can see John's initial story, and you can decide for yourself if he looks younger or older than he does today. So we do have a lot to talk about. Again, I think we're bringing this on ourselves because we've always said in terms of the Amazon news, usually there's not much week to week on Amazon. I think they've been watching the pod, I would imagine. So there's some big things cooking up. We'll dive right in. However, since it is Books and Bourbon, the show that's mostly about books. So John, we love your background. Way to be on theme here, on point. David, I think I see a couple books back there.
Yeah, I got a handful right there.
One or two.
I have a MacBook. Maybe that counts. And Matthew has nothing to hit this.
No, my whole bookshelf is right there.
Perfect. I'm actually going to be redoing my office and putting some bookshelves in. So we'll get on brand here soon. So what are we drinking, boys? The show's mostly about books, not really about bourbon. It's more just alliterative. But I'll go first. I'm taking a page out of David's book. I am drinking coffee today. I actually got stung by a bee. If you follow me on Instagram, I got stung by a wasp about a month ago and broke out in hives from head to toe. No throat issues, no EpiPen, nothing needed. But I did get to go see and support the local hospital by paying a nice emergency room visit. Nothing happened today. My arm is swollen a little. I don't know if you can see it. So I took some Benadryl. No throat issues. I'm good. It was a smaller sweat bee, I believe. So who knows? But no alcohol for me. I don't think Benadryl and alcohol go well together. So it's coffee. Matthew, I don't think you're drinking either. What do you got in front of you?
I've just got a hazy IPA. Just a nice, refreshing beer.
Perfect.
No
Dave,
bourbon involved.
Got today.
I have you're gonna think it's so gross. So I drink coffee, and sometimes I'll have this much coffee left. Instead of throwing it out, I'll just pour water over it, and it becomes a really watered down coffee. And it's room temperature, and so it's people think this is super gross, but I like it.
We need to work up your coffee game, I think.
That sounds horrible.
John, you're close to the coffee scene, just being in university. Is that normal these days? Or is Dave in touch with the youth?
I don't think so. I mean, normally it's oh, I have a little bit of coffee left. Let's add a ton of milk and a ton of sugar. And there we go. Not anything close to, hey, let's just water it down.
All right. Well, we're going to start a GoFundMe so Dave can afford some real coffee. That might be useful. John, do you have anything interesting in front of you today?
I just have a nice, good water bottle of dihydrogen oxide. I actually don't know if you can say it that way at all, but just water.
I think it's hydrogen. Well, that wouldn't be hydrogen dioxide. Dihydrogen. Well, I think that's right. H2O.
Yeah.
We'll go with that.
Sounds good to me.
If you're drinking hydrogen peroxide, we're going to have some issues.
Yeah, that would be a little different.
We won't get into that. Well, it's not bourbon, but we'll say a cheers and kick the show off. So that'll be fun.
Cheers.
Okay, so into the Amazon news segment before we jump into John's story. I'm sure everybody's seen it. If you haven't, maybe you're under a rock or haven't checked Facebook or haven't checked your email. Amazon's re-implemented restock limits. So for those that remember one of our earlier guests, Michael Kreider, you're wrong. Michael, you're rarely wrong, but you're wrong this time. And actually, I agreed with you. I didn't think Amazon would implement them again. This was something when their warehouse space was completely backed up. Labor was really experiencing a heavy shortage. And they did this about a year and a half ago, and it lasted for 6 to 8 months, I believe. It all kind of runs together. But they introduced restock limits. They left them in place, but they pretty much opened it up where it didn't really impact FBA sellers. What those limits are, we'll get to the specifics because I think we reverse engineered it successfully just on the pre-show here. Also, thanks to Michael. I know you're watching. I know your young child is watching too. So we'll try and use big little words, big exclamations and big colors, and hopefully she will enjoy watching. But thanks for watching in California. So we'll get into what the math is and what this means and what you can do about it. But basically, we went as FBA sellers being able to send in pretty much anything to Amazon overnight, I believe Monday, maybe Tuesday of this week. Again, it's all running together. Introduced the restock limits again. And this time it's a little bit softer than it was before. This time they're communicating that it's 4 months of sales. So in general, if you sell 1,000 units a month, you should be able to send in about 4,000 units. If you're over that limit already, which many of you, they say only 5% of sellers are impacted, but booksellers are different than normal sellers. If you're over the limit, nothing happens. There's no fees. There's no penalties. You don't get slapped on the wrist, but you can't send in fresh inventory, which will obviously hurt. If you're under the limit, you might be close to it. So we're going to talk about what does this mean? What are some steps you can take today? So my own limit went down about 50%. So it is meaningful. I can still send inventory in, but not as much as I have in my warehouse right now. So we'll be tweaking and making some changes, and I'll get to that in just a second. Dave, your limits went down considerably as well.
Yeah, mine went down about 55%, I guess.
Okay, and I think you're impacted a little more, partly due to how long you've been doing FBA. So we'll talk about the numbers here in a second. So I'm curious. We'll pick your brain on what you're doing, and then John, your numbers went down as well.
Yeah, mine went down about 50%. So
okay, and serious implications for the business, or are you not sweating right now?
Oh no, we're sweating. Yeah, we're loaded up. We're full, so we're gonna have to make some changes.
Cool. Well, let's get to the math, and then we'll talk about the strategies, and this will be hopefully relevant. Those in the comments, if you want to mention where you're at as well. We're going to kind of do the back of the napkin math, and we'll see if that jives. It kind of makes sense with the few people we've talked to. In general, again, Amazon's communicating 4 months of storage. So if you look up your FBA sales for the last 30 days, or you could look at the whole month of August, for example, since we're September 1st right now. Side note, this show is sponsored by Green Day, Wake Me Up When September Ends. If you don't listen to that song religiously every September 1st and October 1st, I'm very sorry for your soul. It's a beautiful song. It's awesome to wake up every September 1st and just play that at full blast on repeat. So that's, if you know me, you know I listen to that song regularly each year. There's probably something wrong, but therapy is expensive. So in theory, it should be FBA units sold in the last 30 days times 4 should roughly equal where you're at. However, it doesn't. And so what we've kind of backdoored into, again, thanks to Mike Kreider for helping us sort this out, is take your last 4 months of sales. So you can go to Seller Central, look under the business reports, and then look at last 4 months, just FBA. If you do merchant fulfilled as well, cut those units out. Take your total units the last 4 months, divide that by 4, so get your average units per month. Whatever number that is, multiply by 7.5. So Amazon's communicating 4 months, but they're actually giving us 7.5 months worth of inventory, which means if they actually get down to 4 months, we're all going to get pinched even worse. And last year, the limits were 3 months. And again, if they actually go from 4 months to 3 months and stop the generous 7.5 multiple and come down to 3, then we're really going to be hurting as booksellers because it is hard to sell fast enough inventory. So check your own numbers. I know that's a lot of math. Maybe we should have had a whiteboard up here, but take your last 4 months of FBA units. Dollars don't really matter. Take your last 4 months of FBA units, divide by 4 to get your average units sold per month. Take that number, multiply by 7.5. That should roughly equal what your restock limits are. So if you have very limited space, or if you're concerned about space in the future, there's a couple big steps you can do right now. And then I'm really curious to hear what Dave and John, what you two are planning to do about it. So first off, Matthew, you can probably pull this up again. We've got a tool that we built the last time restock limits were out. The tool still runs. It still works great. You can still tip our team if you'd like, but it's 100% free. Restock.thebookflipper.com. What you're going to do, there's some training videos there. There's a actual video. We walk you through everything on YouTube as well. Maybe we can link to that in the show notes down below. I feel like Tim Ferriss when I say that, so that's cool. But restock.thebookflipper.com, you can upload your inventory health report, which is all of your FBA units. What this is going to allow you to do is it basically shows you a quadrant or a grid that shows the lowest used price for all of your books currently on one of the axes or axis, and then it's going to show the sales rank. Amazon doesn't track eScore. They're not as cool as your friends at Scout IQ, but you can look at sales rank and then the price. So what you're going to do is you're going to find books that have high price, low sales rank, leave those alone. They're going to sell quickly, likely, and they're going to make a lot of money. Those are the books you want in your inventory. You're then going to have high price, high sales rank, which means they're not selling very quickly, but there's a lot of money to be had. You should probably keep those or consider keeping those. On the other side, you're going to have low price, low rank, which means they're selling quickly. If they've dropped too much in price, especially if they're older, you may want to weed some of those out. The tool will actually help you kind of slice and dice and take a chunk of those and remove them. And then where you really want to watch out for is low price, high sales rank. So these are ones that either you shouldn't have sent in. We've all been there. We've made mistakes. It's okay. But right now, those units are choking up what you could be having. So if you have storage for 5,000 and you're sitting at 4,000 right now and you want to keep ramping up, you got to do two things. One, you need to get out in front of this right now, because right now Amazon is saying 4 months, but they're giving us 7.5 months. And if labor gets tight or if warehouse space gets tighter as we get to Q4, this might go down even further, maybe down to 3. And then even if you're on the borderline, on the fence of being pinched, you're going to be pinched. So step one is remove old inventory. You want to remove slow moving inventory that doesn't have a chance to sell very often, and the prices have dropped. So you want to kind of clear that out as quickly as you can. What that's going to do, hopefully, it allows you to then have more space that you can send in fresh inventory. The fastest way to increase your sell-through rate is to send in fresh books. It's not as important right now, although if you want to get out in front of it, I wouldn't necessarily change your sourcing strategies. I would still send in some long tail books, but you do want to get a good range of fast moving books in there with high eScore, low sales rank. What that's going to do is Amazon typically updates these numbers weekly. I believe it was every Monday over the last period. Although if their executives look at the warehouse space and change, this can change daily, and it could change randomly in the middle of a week. Amazon has done it before. But in general, this changes once a week. And what they're going to do is take your what it seems like your last 4 months of sales, get your average units per month, and then times by whatever ratio they decide fits. So clear out old slow moving inventory. You can liquidate it. You can dispose of it. If you want free shipping material, you can get it returned to you. But you want to clear that out as soon as you possibly can. And the tool restock.thebookflipper.com can help you with that decision. And then step 2 is continue to send in inventory right now. If you've got 1,000 books ready to go, but you haven't sent them in and you have capacity today, get those out this week, because if they change on Monday again, if you've already got the shipment scheduled, you're going to be good. They're still going to take it. If you don't have the batch completed, Amazon's not going to take it. So you always want to kind of just speed up maybe a little more than you're used to the listing side of things. And then what's going to happen is you're going to start working and spinning the wheel in a good way that helps you, because your sell-through rate's going to go up, your units sold every month is going to go up, and you're going to free up space to continue sending in fresh inventory. So you're going to sell most of your sales are going to come from the freshest inventory that you have. Typically, we see 50 to 60% sell-through rates in the first, typically 60 to 90 days. So just rough numbers, 60% sell-through in 3 months. What that means is the ones that haven't sold, the ones that are older than 3 months, there's still some meat left, but those are going to sell more slowly than you're used to. And if your inventory gets stuck with all of the slow moving inventory because you can't add more to it, then as Amazon tightens up, you're going to be getting more and more harmed. So that's the game. Free up old moving or slow old inventory, put it in a nursing home / send it back to you, whatever analogy you want to use. And then send in what you have so that you can keep those units selling. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my own tool. We're going to definitely fire that up. I'm going to try and get rid of some of my duds, because I only do inventory maintenance 3-4 times a year. I'm not as religious about it as I could be. And I'm going to be trying to list what I can just to try and get some fast moving inventory. And hopefully, if the inventory is moving quickly, then I will be blessed by the gods, or the Amazon God at least, and hopefully be able to stay ahead of that curve. So Dave, you're in a little interesting spot because you've just been selling FBA for about 2 months now. Is that right?
Yeah, I've got a question for you actually, Caleb, before we jump to that. So using the removal tool, when you put in a removal order, does that instantly give you space?
I don't think it's interesting, but it is fairly quick. Amazon can sometimes take up to like 10 to 14 days, maybe even longer. I forget what their stated time is to remove the inventory. Again, if they have labor shortages, they're not going to prioritize removing old inventory. They're going to prioritize orders because they love their customers. But if I remember correct, I believe it'll kick in within 24 to 48 hours. I think it's pretty quick. So that should free up space, and then you can send in fresh inventory at least until the limits change again. And again, you'll have some fast moving inventory to help you.
I've heard a few questions or people ask, I guess in the past, Amazon has done like free removals from time to time. But from my understanding, those have typically been associated with fee changes. Do you anticipate any sort of free removal period upcoming?
I do not, although, so the fee removals typically are probably lawyer induced, meaning if we send inventory to Amazon and they said, hey, you can sell this book and we're going to take $3 in fees, and then they change the fee structure and go to $3.50. Technically, we're at their mercy, but I think their lawyers have kind of said, hey, you better give people the chance to remove it because you changed the rules from what they sent the book in at. Now, Amazon is adding about a 30-cent fee for Q4. The storage fees already go up. There's already other fee increases, but they're doing a pick, pack, and ship fee, or the FBA fee. That is going up. So maybe their lawyers will kick in, as well as I imagine there's a large amount of backlash right now with the fees changing, as well as now the restock limits kicking in. And Amazon does occasionally relent, and they may look at that and actually decide to offer free removals. So if I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet on it, but it wouldn't surprise me. I bet we have a 20% chance of getting free removals.
Cool. It's also interesting because Amazon sort of gave us a sneak peek. They pretty much said that booksellers who sell on FBA make up about 5% of the FBA sellers, because it's like, yeah, 5% of the FBA sellers will be affected, but it seems like 100% of all booksellers were affected. So
yeah, they're affected. It depends on the level of affectation, if that's a word. I know a lot of us, I still have room I can send in, but I don't have nearly the quantity that I built. I was kind of being lazy because I just assumed it was going to stay. So it's going to force us to run more efficiently, which is fine. Kreider says in their experience, a removal order affects the restock limits pretty quickly. So I would say a day or so just to be cautious. So Dave, let's just talk about the numbers real quick. I don't know if you want to share your specifics, but you've been selling FBA for 2 months now. You're primarily a merchant fulfilled operation. And so the back of the napkin math, 4 months divided by your only 2 months of sales is hurting you, because you're getting effectively your average monthly volume cut in half. And when they multiply by 7.5, that's hurting. So
for sure. Yeah. And the biggest thing too is like this is like our 3rd or 5th go at FBA. I think, Caleb, when you and I first met, immediately afterwards, I tried doing FBA, and we stopped doing that for whatever reason. But just recently, like 2 months ago, we started really pushing hard for FBA, and our limits were capped at 1,000 units. And then, so like over the last 4 months, we've been gradually increasing our limits. The first shipment, I think we sent in like 600 items, and then we sent in another 400. And then like, it was just like kind of patchy how we were sending it in, just because every time Amazon would increase our limits, we would just try to fill that up so that way they would give us more space. But then what ended up happening is like this last Monday when they cut limits, when you look at all 4 months, like you said, Caleb, like, in what would that be? Is it June? No. It'd be May, June, July, August. Yeah. So May, we had like 7 or 10 sales on FBA. And then in June, I think we had like 100. And then in July, we had like 300. And then in August, I think we had 1,500 units in sales or something like that. And essentially, they took the summation of that, divided that by 4, and then multiplied by 7.5 months, according to sort of our working theory. Mm-hmm. And so where that puts me right now is kind of a tough spot. Yeah, not a lot of space. We already made some adjustments. We are very fortunate where we have a pretty robust MF operation. And so it was as easy for us as like essentially like adjusting the triggers to prioritize MF. And so, yeah, we're just listing everything MF again until we figure out the next step.
Yeah, and it's nice that you have that capacity and ability. We're about 50-50 MF FBA right now, and we're going to just try and ramp up and get as much FBA as we can just to wedge it in there and hopefully sell enough and stay ahead of it, because I would prefer to do FBA versus MF, but we do have the room and capacity in case we have to go MF, then, we can. John, anything differently that you're going to be doing based outside of what Dave and I have discussed?
No, it's pretty much the same. I mean, last time we were really hurt because we hadn't actually set up our merchant fulfilled operation. And now we're kind of set up with a good merchant fulfilled operation. So we just set our preferences. We had them at dead even and just reset our preferences to prefer merchant fulfilled. So basically that, I mean, the other option we're actually toying with, since we already do some wholesale to other sellers, is, is there possibly a market for the Class B FBA items that we've been sending in ourselves? And is there a possible market outside of Amazon where we could send those directly to people and they could get a mass of books at once? So we're just toying around with that possibility, but that's about it. Yep.
Cool. Well, enough. We'll probably do a private or a separate YouTube interview just with this. So this will be definitely a different topic, but I want to get to John's story. I will say we don't have tickets to sell just yet. Those will probably go live tomorrow, but we are locking in our speakers for our, whatever we're calling it. It won't be Turn the Page. Those will be restarting again soon as well, but this will be something similar. It's just a Scout IQ version, probably called the Seller Summit, Scout IQ Summit, TBD. We threw out Reunion. Dave thought that sounded like an awkward family event that we want to steer clear of. So it won't be called a Reunion, but October 14 and 15, if you want to circle those dates on your calendar. Potential speakers involve maybe Romer the Romer. We do have a commitment from Michael Fortinall down in Texas. He runs a very efficient operation, and I'm excited to have him share a lot of his experience in terms of setting up systems and just running a business like a business, and then working on a third speaker as well. So it's Vegas. It's October. You got most of these pretty faces here. John, we should get you out there as well. But you won't want to miss it. It's a really good chance to connect with resellers. You'll learn a ton of content as well, but mostly the magic is in the in-between conversations that will happen and the networking that you can do. So circle those dates and we will get into that and push that out probably tomorrow. So stay tuned to email and Facebook. All right, Mr. Troutman, it's your time to shine. So when we last left you, well, actually, before we do that, let's talk about your 30,000 foot view. Again, if you want to check out the 100 book challenge, John shares his story pretty much around the time you were getting started selling on Amazon. And actually, before we do that, we should talk about how you originally got into selling on Amazon, if you want to do that.
Oh boy. Yeah. I actually worked at a running shoe store when I was in Colorado, and I was fulfilling these random orders of shoes that were like size 8 women's, size 13 men's, size 11, and like it was one of those things like, okay, these guys have to be reselling these. What's going on? And so I would look up the prices on Amazon and be like, we're selling these shoes super cheap. They're definitely making money somewhere. So I had recently met this guy in my small group from church. His name was Caleb Roth, who said he sold books on Amazon. I was like, I'll go pick his brain. And so Caleb and I went to lunch one day, and I was asking him about shoes and what that looked like. And he said, maybe you should start with books. It's a little bit cheaper to get into. And that way, if it doesn't work out. And he actually was kind of hinting at like, hey, you should just try and sell with me. But he said, like, just go start an Amazon account and go pick up some books. And literally, like, I think it was that day, the next day, I set up the account. And the next week, I went out and bought a couple books. And within a couple of days, I had sold like 2 or 3 of them. I was like, this actually kind of works. And that's really the start. It's just the lunch with Caleb. And Caleb and I were good friends for a long time. So it was very beneficial to sit down and pick his brain and just glean from the insights he always gives.
Well, it's a moral of the story is be careful who you hang out with, because they might talk you into something that
it's true.
In this case actually has lasted a few months. Part of the conversation, I was trying to trying to make it as awkward as possible, but you did a good job. I remember saying like, hey, you could come work for me. I'll teach you the business. I didn't really want to hire a lot of people at the time, but I always say this to anybody I hire, and some people take me up on it, is I want you to go run your own business. I love helping entrepreneurs. I love inspiring people to go do it. And I was like, you should do it yourself. But if you want to learn, come work for me to get started. And I think there was just like maybe a Sunday morning or two of just a little awkwardness as you're like, yeah, I think I'm doing this on my own. And it was kind of this like feeling it out, like, are you going to come work for me or are you going to do it yourself? And then you were like, no, I'm stepping out. I was like, great. So didn't derail the friendship, which I'm really grateful for.
Me too.
So you got started with the 100 book challenge. Can you give just a 30,000 foot view, maybe a 2-minute overview of your business model starting out, just for those that are getting started as well? I share a little bit about the auctions that you did, and then we'll kind of talk about that pivot when you moved to North Carolina and what the business looks like today.
Yeah. So I started out really just going to different thrift stores and cherry picking. So going in and learning to go scan for books, and eventually library sales. You get the thrill of a library sale. I miss doing that, actually, going to the library sales. It's a lot of fun. But that's how I started.
The whale sale?
Oh yeah, that was awesome.
That's a staple of being out in Denver. That and the Denver public sale that happens downtown. Those are something to look forward to.
I think we did the whale sale together once or twice, actually.
We probably did. So, yeah, those are great sales, great volunteers, and it is fun to just go whole hog and see other scouters and try and compete on speed. It does something to the adrenaline.
It does. But anyways, about the time I started the 100 book challenge, a little before that, I had got into a deal. I found Salvation Army actually in the area, and they were doing auctions every day. They were doing auctions. And so I was like, I'll show up one day and just see what happens. And I showed up, and they were like, oh, you sell books? Well, we'll pull out a Gaylord of books and sell it to you. I was like, all right. And so I got a Gaylord of books, and it was like dirt cheap for a full Gaylord. I was like, I think this is a good deal. Let's see what this is like. I started scanning through it. I was like, oh, this is great. And as I started doing the 100 book challenge, that was still kind of the thing I would do. And at that time, I was still in school. I was at Denver Seminary in Colorado, and we had decided to kind of really go after school full time. So I could only do 2, maybe 3 days a week. And so I was going out to the Salvation Army 2 or 3 days a week, picking up 1 or 2 Gaylords. And I mean, I can't tell you how sweet this deal was. They would let me sit there in their parking lot, scan through these Gaylords, pick whatever books I wanted out of them, and then I would just give them the recycling. And they would, go and basically trash them. I was like, this is crazy. So I had hardly any overhead cost or anything like that. And I was just able to go pick up the books whenever I could make it up there, which was a really, really sweet deal. So moving on from that, and right after the 100 book challenge ended, actually, in the process of that, the Salvation Army in the area started to close their doors. And so they were still getting all kinds of donations, but they were no longer trying to sell them. So they were working out of that. And since I was one of the only people who would show up to these auctions and get books, they were like, hey, we're overrun with books. Do you want some? I was like, well, yeah. What do you mean? What's this look like? And so I rented a storage unit. Somebody said they were coming in from their hot storage unit earlier. And I was like, oh, man, those days. I remember that. I rented a storage unit, and I would pick up 8 Gaylords or 12 Gaylords at a time and go to the storage unit, scan through them, list them from the storage unit, and did that for about probably 4 months. And eventually I needed more space, so I rented a small warehouse space. It was actually a loft. And so we had to get the Gaylords out of the truck, put them on a forklift, and lift them up into a loft and put them in there. And then I'd have to run up the stairs, use a pallet jack to move it so I could get the next Gaylord up there. It was interesting, but what you do for books. And so I had about 24 Gaylords at one time, and that was when they were finally shutting the doors down. So I just had to pick up whatever was left. And about that time, that was when I started chewing on, like, could we really make this into like a business and not just like I'm going out and trying to find books, not just necessarily a side hustle, but something that's really a business. And so I talked to my brother a few times, Preston, and I've been like, hey, you want to go in with this on me? Like we could start our own business and, work together and figure it out. And so we ultimately did. At about that time, we were transitioning out of what I had left in Colorado and transitioning into opening a warehouse in North Carolina. I was still in Colorado at the time. And so we jumped in kind of. So Preston, Caleb just asked who PT is on the stream. That's Preston.
Oh, that's totally fine. We've got an extra person in the stream, and I wondered if our link went like public or we had someone spamming us. So cool.
He chose the wrong stream. That's okay. Hey, Preston.
Cool.
But yeah, so we got a warehouse, and we actually had a 1,500 square foot warehouse. If you know anything about warehouses, that is tiny.
That's not a lot of
space.
It is
nothing. And we were like, I think we can make this work. And it was, Preston will tell you, it was like, oh man, I was in Colorado. So I was buying truckloads of books, getting them shipped to Preston, and he was crawling through Gaylords, listing whatever we could. And I was doing everything on the back end, handling the Amazon, the inventory management, the customers, scheduling loads. And it was like a grind to start. We jumped in and just had no clue what we were doing. But I mean, that's part of learning, like, what is it, the transition of making it a hustle into a business. And so
pause real quick. I love a couple things about your story. One is just like, I'm not a huge fan of the word grind or hustle. I think Gary Vee beats those to death. But when you're getting started out, I really do admire that. And you put the work in, Preston put the work in. I know your team did. And I love hearing the creative stories of entrepreneurs getting going. And yeah, putting the books up into a loft and running up the stairs and moving stuff around is not ideal. But you find a way to make it work. So John F. Kennedy had a quote that actually applies to books. He said, ask not what you can do for books, but what books can do for you. And I know I mixed that around and maybe got country and books confused. But I think it's funny. Everybody has the stories of filling their bathroom or their guest bedroom at their house with books. And they just let books intrude on their life, which is fine. I think that's all part of the startup, and it just feels like success, and that's beautiful. The other thing I like about you is you do dig into your numbers. I know most of the times we've sat down and talked over the last couple of years, you've had a spreadsheet ready to go. We've been just kind of playing with assumptions and trying to figure out how this works. So let's kind of keep hearing more of that story, how you turned this from a grind and a hustle and just kind of doing whatever it took to get going to saying, hey, I think there's something to this. Let's pour gas on the fire. Let's run this more like a business. So you were getting past the startup phase and moving into scale up. Do you remember one moment or one day when you kind of said, outside of bringing your brother in, where you said, man, this is working. I know this can work. Let's scale it up. Or did you sort of feel your way into that?
I would say a little bit of both. I sat down and crunched the numbers over and over again. So I was using all the numbers that I had generated basically from when I was getting Gaylords of books from the Salvation Army and tracking exactly how many I was listing each day, knowing about how many I would have per Gaylord. And I was tracking that. I was tracking, what the shipping costs were, everything that went into it. I was tracking from the very beginning. And so I had built a spreadsheet initially to try and break down, here's my guesstimate, hopefully a little bit educated, of, hey, this is what this would look like, based off how many trailer loads of books we would do. And after going through that and building that, I could guess and have a relatively educated guess of, this is exactly what it's going to cost initially to start up, and then this is what we can expect in return. And I think the big question mark I had going into it was labor. I didn't really know what that was going to look like. Would we be able to get through kind of the numbers that I was expecting to get through? And honestly, that's still, I struggle with estimating what labor is going to be, because anytime you're doing it and it's your thing, you're going to be able to do it a lot faster than anyone else. And when you start paying other people to do it, they're not going to be quite as quick as you are, because you're used to it being your thing. And so that's been a big learning curve throughout the whole process of going from a hustle, if you will, to starting to scale this to actually turning it into a little bit of a business. So the spreadsheet helped. That's kind of the first thing is understanding the numbers, understanding that the possibility was definitely there. Yes, it's a risk, but the possibility was there, was the first step. But then it was a lot of filling it out. I mean, to my brother's credit, we had some really hard conversations the first few months of like, I think you can do more, Preston. And he's like, dude, I am crawling through Great Gaylords every day. What are you talking about? I'm like, dude, you're right. You're right. Like, this is a learning process. And I threw him into the fire and he caught on really quick, actually. And so it was filling it out and then learning what it looks like to actually have people who are motivated in there. We still toy around, but we early on kind of gave up the whole hourly pay scale. And instead now we pay off production. And that actually, a lot of our scanners will show up and they get to leave early every day if they want to, because they can get in and scan the numbers that we want them to scan. And if they get done at 3:30 instead of 5, they can leave at 3:30. And we decided to do that just so that we're getting the numbers we need to, and it motivates people to actually get to where you want them to get. And that was one of the big. Yeah,
I love lining up the incentives, and I guess over time, especially as you get more efficiencies, that may change. But anytime you can say, "Hey, I'm paying you to scan, 2,500 books a person today, or whatever your numbers are," and hey, I'm going to pay you a daily wage to do it. And if you get it done quickly because you're faster, that's great. The only downside, if you had some employees kind of lose some of the focus and the quality control just in the name of speed, have you seen that happen, or has it worked out fairly well?
It's actually worked out really well. And it's one of those things that's all credit to my brother who runs the warehouse. And because you have to touch a book multiple times, you're seeing that, and you kind of have an idea of who's scanning what. And we're small enough at this point where it's not like, we have 20 people over there scanning, so we don't know where it's coming from. We have a few people over there scanning. So with that, we kind of know where it's coming from or who may be kind of consistently making these mistakes. And so that's the benefit of being where we are. And we haven't run into that yet. So it's worked out really well, actually.
That's awesome. Dave, you probably got some questions here based on what you're hearing on the labor front. I know that's a bit of a bear for you. Do you want to chime in and ask a few questions there related to labor?
Yeah, sure. So John, one of the obstacles that we encountered when we were looking at piece rate pay for compensation for labor, essentially compensating based on production, was that, well, number one, quality, as Caleb touched on, but how do you account for, I guess there are a lot of secondary tasks beyond the primary of just scanning, for example, tidying up afterwards, or occasionally, you get items where you have to do like a manual type in as opposed to scanning. And I'm sure the people who want to just hit their numbers and get out may be inclined to just like push those to their neighbor, or, did you encounter any of that?
Well, definitely over time we have a little bit, but what we do, as you're aware, being a bulk business, we're trying to learn to act like a bulk business. And so a lot of the type ins, we sort those out right from the get-go, and we don't have the people scanning doing that. And so we have a separate station for the type ins, and where they would have their own quota to do that. And that way, if it's something that's typed in or even has a label over it, they can just move it over to the side and scan what they can scan. So that was kind of being able to take that out. What was the first question again, David?
I guess, like, how do you handle, I guess, ancillary tasks, so tasks not
Oh, yeah.
directly related to like production, but like for example, in the early days, we had people like tidying up the office area and the bathrooms and the break area after work, or occasionally we will have people like switch from scanning over to like, hey, would you be able to help me unload this truck? And it's a little more difficult especially when you're smaller and you need people to be able to wear multiple hats.
Yep.
How are you able to overcome that and have dedicated piece rate, dedicated labor?
Yeah, I'll give all the credit to Preston here, who manages the warehouse. He has done an incredible job with teaching them, our employees, what that looks like. But I think he set up the expectation from day one that you may get done early scanning, and once you're done, then you have a specific station. Your station has to be cleaned up before you can leave, because books are messy and they will overrun you with the mess if you're not careful. And so they know they have to clean up and specifically what they need to do every day. Then like we definitely have, all the time when you're unloading Gaylords and you get spills and, just whatever happens, you got to pull all hands on deck to just get something done really quickly. And Preston's, again, he's just been on top of that. And we have some really, really good employees right now. We've gone through some that it's like we've held on to too long, and they're not really team players. And as much as we want to incentivize them individually as much as we can, we actually incentivize them as a team right now. And so as a team, if you're on the scanning as a team, this is the number you need to hit. And then those who are listing, they have their number they need to hit, whether it's FBA, merchant fulfilled, but they still function a little bit as a team. And so if we need to pull people off to do something, then we can, then they really do function as a team. They know whatever needs to be done, they have to hop in and do it. And then if that's the case, we'll sometimes adjust the numbers. Like, normally it would be X amount for scans and stuff like that. But when we recognize we've had to spend 30 minutes or an hour doing something else, thank you for your help, we'll adjust the numbers to make this relatively similar. So
I feel like, I don't know, John. So like I feel that I had a tendency to do that too, but a more recent realization that I had was the number is the number, and regardless of what happens, we should put our minds together to hit that number, because like you as the business owner, or us, all of us as the owner, it's not like, oh, well, we had some pallet spill this month. Sorry, Mr. or Miss Landlord, we don't have the entire rent for this month. Like, numbers aren't often flexible, at least on our side. And so by putting, I guess, an equal share of the responsibility on the team, what I've sort of realized, of course, being fair to them too, and, communicating all this in a respectful way. But what I've realized is, even when there are hiccups or obstacles, people and teams are more resilient than you. And I think that's just kind of a more recent realization that I had. I don't know if anyone wants to chime in on that.
Well, I actually love that. Preston and I have been talking quite a bit as of late of like, well, what does this really look like? Because we still have to hit our numbers. Like, if we want to look at, scans, and we're looking at just how many scans do we get per month? Well, we still need to get those numbers per month. So if we have a day where we miss that number that we need to get to, well, then you have to make up for it another day. And so that's where, like, you're constantly making decisions. And this is with any business, but especially operating a warehouse that is about efficiency and production. So when you're making those decisions, you have to recognize whatever decision you make has repercussions down the road. And so, we actually have a decent setup a little bit where I get to be sitting back from a distance and looking at the numbers and being able to say like, okay, but we still have to get to this number for this month or this week. We need to get to this number. Where Preston's seeing the day-to-day and he's able to operate the day-to-day and say like, okay, we've had, 2 Gaylords spill. It's been exhausting. This has just been a rough day. Let's get it over with and we'll make up for it at a later time. So we're still finding our groove in that, but I agree wholeheartedly that if you run a business, you got to hit those numbers and you need to know what numbers those are that you need to hit. So
speaking of numbers, have you dialed it into a specific number? It sounds like you're just optimizing for scans. And if you get the scans figured out, then it feels like everything else takes care of itself. Is that accurate? Or have you picked a different number that makes more sense to follow?
Scans is our primary number right now. We're in an interesting position of like, we are really actively trying to ramp up from where we've been for the last year and a half. And so we're still filling out like, okay, well, we need to get to this number, but this number is not going to stay for very long. We've got to get to a new number soon. And so we're still trying to navigate that. But scans, the way our process works, scans are really the primary number we want to look at, because if you're not getting the scans, you're not going to be able to do anything else. And so you have to be able to get the scans to go through. But then once we get the scans, we also want to look at the numbers of how many we're listing per day. And that's, whether that's the FBA, merchant fulfilled, or I'll go ahead and mention Marketplace is one of the primary outlets we use. We'll talk about that, I think. So we'll look at where we're listing and how many items we're listing. And then we also look at orders that we fulfill, because when you're doing merchant fulfilled, you don't get paid until you're fulfilling the orders. And so we look at basically those 3 numbers. And we look at that on a weekly basis. Like here's our goal for the week. Then we break that down per day. But that's what we want to be hitting every week.
Perfect. Do you look, I'm sure you do, because I know we've talked about numbers before. So you look at scans, that's kind of your overarching like metric. If you don't scan enough books, obviously you're not going to be able to do the business you want to do. Do you get hung up on yield and accept rates and any of those things too, just as a baseline of quality from your suppliers? Or you just know that things will take care of themselves and all you have to do is handle the scans?
Oh, I'm looking at the yield for sure.
Okay.
But I don't want our warehouse paying attention to that. And that's just more out of sheer focus. I want them to be focused on getting through the material. I'll take care of that on the back end. So I'm definitely paying attention pretty much every day on what our overall yield is. Are our numbers looking like they've been looking? Are they looking better? Are they looking worse? And what supplier that is. And we track everything by actual trailer load, and then by supplier as well. So if something happens and all of a sudden we get 3 or 4 loads in a row from a supplier and we can see, oh, this is drastically different, I can reach out to them and say, hey, what's going on? And figure that out, or we just go to a new supplier. So we're definitely tracking the yield, or I should say, on my end. But
I love the fact that you can be out of the business a bit. And I think that's really important. Dave and I talk about that in even the software business and in our own book businesses, is when you're in the weeds, sometimes you can get like myopic. You can kind of get stuck just focusing on the problem that's in front of you, versus there has to be some sort of a time that you say, I'm going to come back up for air and kind of look out over the whole business. I used to do this on the whiteboard. Got it over here. I can gesture, but no one can see it. But I used to do this on the whiteboard for sure. Once a year, we had like a big sit down meeting with the team. And I try and do it quarterly and literally just lay out, here's the ways our business makes money. Here's the effort that we're spending on each way. Here's some of the overall metrics. I try and do it with our software team as well. And what that allows us to do is just kind of all of us can visualize what's going on. And I love the fact that you're sort of the maybe it's the pilot kind of dictating what's there. Maybe it's air traffic control. And I think Preston's flying the plane and controlling everything that's there. And I love that you simplified it for the employees. Yield isn't their problem. That's not something they can control. They shouldn't be incentivized based on that. What they can control is scanning books effectively, efficiently, and with a quality control. And so if you can just simplify their job through your systems and your processes, then they can be free to do the best job they can. And then you can sort of sit back and provide that insight into where the plane is flying. So I love that.
Caleb, I've got another analogy that I'm just going to throw out. You were talking about sports earlier. I see John as head coach, Preston as offensive coordinator, and the players are, or the employees are the team.
I love it.
Yeah, I like that too. And I sound pretty smart doing this, but I'll give David some credit. He's really helped me out in the last year, actually, a lot in like recognizing, hey, this is what the warehouse needs to be focused on, and this is what I could be focused on. So if you ever get the chance to pick David's brain, you obviously should too.
I appreciate it, John.
And if you want to pick David's brain, you can come to the Seller Summit, October 14 and 15 in Las Vegas. Dave's pretty face will be there. His very intelligent brain and his wit will be there at your disposal. So if you want to get close access to Dave, you could do that. That's a great little plug-in. John, we'll get to marketplace just briefly. I don't know that it necessarily fits really well. I'm curious, as you kind of step back and where you're sitting as the head coach, we'll stick with that analogy. Actually, the big headphones that are on you look very much like a head coach setup. So kudos, you got the sweater on. If you cut the sleeves off, you can turn it into
I just need a clipboard.
Good to go. You got to throw it down
every
once in a while.
Yeah.
From where you're sitting and looking at your business, what are you most optimistic about over the next year or two as you try and pursue growth? And then what's something that keeps you up at night, or what's something that you're maybe more pessimistic about?
Well, I could answer the pessimistic really quick because that starts with A and ends with Mazan. Yeah, I mean, I look at the book business and I see Amazon scares me sometimes because when you get bigger, the changes they make affect you a lot more and a lot quicker. And so you have to learn to be very agile, even as a bigger business. And we've developed that, but it still scares me a little bit, just being so engrossed in Amazon. And as a bookseller, I haven't figured out a way out of that. But what I love about this business, and what I love about what we get to do, is we've gone from Amazon being like the chunk of our business to Amazon being about 10% of our business or so. Well, that's not revenue. That's in terms of where things go. And, that to me is a step in the right direction. What I love is that we can use books to really help other people, help other sellers. That's where we want to go. That's where we want to move our business as much as we can. Where we basically just act as a wholesaler, and we can get more material into other people's hands in a way that's actually beneficial to them, cost effective for them, and yet still beneficial for us and covering the expenses that we need. And that's what makes me most optimistic, is just the many different avenues you have to wholesale items, to work with other sellers, and the avenues that we haven't even really touched on yet. And I think there's more to do. So we'll see what comes from it, but that's the optimism I have is what opportunities are there that we're not even touching yet. So.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting things is the bigger you get and the more volume you're starting to pull in, you can start to get a little bit of leverage. You can start to get, contracts with your suppliers. You can reach new suppliers that maybe wouldn't have wanted to sell you 1 truckload a month, but if you're taking on 5, they'd be happy to work with you. So there's definitely some economies of scale that you could pick up on and use to sort of get your flywheel running perfectly, or more efficiently. You're never going to be perfect with it. So real quick, do you want to explain the marketplace just from a supplier perspective? So for those that have heard, may or may not have heard about it, we have something called Pallet IQ. It is basically a marketplace where you can buy inventory. So suppliers like John, a lot of times they need cash flow. I know, John, that's been an issue, and we've talked about that a lot over the last few years. As you scale an inventory business with warehouse and labor, it does become a little bit cost prohibitive, and you need cash to do it. So one of the ways that John is able to get cash brought forward today is he's able to take some of those Gaylords that he's generating of green or acceptable material for Amazon. And what we do is we put a price on it. We say based on historical sales, based on eScore, based on what we think of the market, this book might make $10 on Amazon in the next 3 to 6 months. However, we can sell it for half of that, maybe $5. So it typically tends to be 50 cents on the dollar. John's able to take that money today and then use that money to go buy the next truckload. So you talk about, John is basically buying the whole cow and processing out and selling the steak and the hamburger onto other customers that are willing to take the risk. And they're hoping to maybe spend, $1,500 on a pallet, maybe turn that into $3,000 if everything sells. Of course, not everything will. So realistically, maybe making 30 to 50 to 60% ROI. So can you touch on that? So from the buyer side, and if you want to learn more about this program, you guys can visit palletiq.com. We actually have the .com there, not .co. So palletiq.com, you can visit that. You can see what that looks like as a buyer. On the supplier side, we are a little bit light on suppliers right now. So John, thank you for doing this. Do you want to explain just a little bit about that process from your perspective? And then you've got a little twist on it as well, where you list for them. So you want to explain that and why people should work with you versus any of the other suppliers?
Yeah. So you said it well, but we buy books. Ultimately by the tractor trailer load. So you're talking about, we usually get around 25,000, 30,000 items in a trailer load, and so you're talking about 25,000, 30,000 books coming in, and we scan through. And basically the cream of the crop of what we have in that trailer load, we use something we call a marketplace, and you can find that at palletiq.com again. And we'll take those items that we would normally list ourselves, the cream of the crop FBA items, and we sell them at a price set by PalletIQ based off historical data, based off the likeliness that it is to sell. And all that you can find, again, all that information. I'm not going to go into the pricing information, but that's all set. And we sell it directly to whoever it is as the buyer. And so they get those items, they're ready to go. We've already graded them, so they should be all listable into their FBA account, and they could list them directly there. Now, what we do different, and we pretty much, we will list or send them to other people, but almost all of our customers are people that we list the items directly into their accounts. So they never actually have to touch the items. We send them into the Amazon fulfillment center for them. And I believe we may be one of two now, but I believe we're the only ones who actually do this. And we charge $1 per item that we list for that. But the benefit of that is, yes, you're paying $1 per item, but typically when you would get all these items, you would have to pay freight cost on top of that and LTL freight to wherever you are. And so say you buy 1,000 items via this marketplace, and they're usually around $2.50 to $3 or so per item is what I usually calculate for ours. And so say you're $2,500 you spend to get these 1,000 items sent to you. Well, that's an additional, $100, $200, usually around $200. And then you have to pay to send all those items into Amazon. A lot of people don't have the LTL set up on their Amazon or don't know how to use it, don't feel comfortable for doing that. And so you end up paying 30, 35 cents an item to send it into Amazon, which is an additional 350 or so. So for not really much more, you take out the shipping cost to you. So you pay that $2,500 and then you pay $1 per item. So if all 1,000 went in to your Amazon account, then it would be $3,500 total. Now, Amazon boots a lot of those items, and you don't know what they're going to boot until after you list them. And we actually take out everything that Amazon boots for you. So you're only paying for the items that are actually sent into Amazon, and you're not paying freight cost. And we get a better freight rate because we usually send 2 or 3 pallets in at a time to Amazon. So instead of paying $130 or so to send the items into Amazon, you're usually paying like $50, maybe $80 to send the items in. So when you factor in all those costs, you're paying maybe $200 or $300 more to not have to do any of the work. Typically on like a 1,000 item order.
Yeah,
And
when you factor that in and talk about the cost savings on the LTL freight, especially with the lift gate, what it works out to is essentially you're getting prep done for roughly 50 cents or less per item, which if you want to get a book prep company to do it, I think $1 now is about the cheapest you're going to see. A lot of times that goes up to $1.25 or $1.50. So that is basically you're getting very, very cheap prep. And for those that maybe live outside the country or don't want to deal with even touching the books, this really just turns it into a kind of a commodity where you can buy the inventory. You're taking the risk that nothing happens to your account or the market. And if that works out well, you should be able to, recoup your investment and earn some sort of an ROI in the first couple months, 3 to 6 to 9 months, and then rinse and repeat. And the fact that we have repeat buyers coming back specifically asking for you is a bit of a testament to that. So I didn't want to make this a huge promo for the marketplace, but I know that's been important to your business. It's something we can do as well. So if you guys want to learn more, palletiq.com. If you want more information about the pricing or to get on the list or see where you are, if you do have room for restock limits, you can email a different John. We tend to hire Johns. John actually used to run customer support for Scout IQ, so thank you for that. We have a different John who now lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. He runs our marketplace program, but you can email John, Jon, and that is just support@palletiq.com, or you can fill out the form on palletiq.com. Okay. I want to be respectful of time. We've gone an hour 15. We're going to switch gears slightly. For those still watching, thank you for being here. Hopefully it's been really fun to see your journey, John, and see how you got started, like most of us, cherry picking and then working your way up to baby bulk and then graduating to a warehouse and a team. And I love the fact that you've got the head hat on now and headgear, and you're able to actually kind of call the shots and see that team continue to thrive and succeed. So kudos on the work you've done, the hustle and the grind, and now you kind of have your strategy hat on. That's amazing. And it's really, really going to be fun to keep watching your journey and see where you end up next. So for those watching, we're going to take a handful of Q&A. If you have questions for John or even Dave or Matthew or myself, you can drop those in the comments. We will get to those. But before we do that, we're going to get to the last segment that we do, which is the geek out moment. So what are you guys geeking out about? It doesn't have to be Amazon related. It doesn't have to be books. It's just something fun that you've been playing with. Dave or Matthew, you want to kick us off?
You go, Dave.
Okay, sure. So I actually just found out about this today, but essentially the USPS, I found out, publishes all of their internal reports to their commission, and it talks about a lot of different changes to different services such as media mail and bound printed matter and what have you. And if you want a sneak peek of rate changes and what's to come, you can just access this. It's going to take me a second to just pull it up, but I just started reading through a bunch of the reports today because I was just kind of curious as far as what the next couple of months looks like. And it was really interesting. I'm going to look for it, but while I look for that, if someone else, it's called the PRC. It's called PRC.gov, and it's the Postal Regulatory Commission, and you can go in PRC.gov, and you could literally look at all the active cases and do searches based on what product class you're looking for. It's really, really interesting. PRC.gov.
Sweet. I love how you're forward thinking there and checking that out. Matthew, what have you been geeking out over lately?
This is a really small one, but I've had the book Meditations by Marcus Aurelius for a long time, and I've read through little bits and pieces of it here, and I've got another book that references him a lot, but I actually read through it from start to finish. And for those that don't know, Marcus Aurelius was an emperor of Rome, one of the last good emperors, and he basically had a journal he kept for a long, long time of just his thoughts on trying to be a better person and do better in his life, that eventually someone found and eventually became the book it is today. It wasn't supposed to become a book. Anyways, though, it was just so interesting reading through this of someone's mind from a long, long time ago that we think is very different than we are today, but they have so many of the exact same problems and exact same thoughts, and just this emperor of Rome talking about how it's tough to get out of bed in the morning, but he knows he has stuff to do, and here's some of the things he can do to get out of the bed on time. And these people are annoying. I've got all these distractions in my life, and just all these things we think are kind of either unique to us or unique to the day and age we live in that people have been dealing with for a long, long, long time. So it's really cool just to read through that and see all of these thoughts that are pretty much the same 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago as they were for us now. And it's just a really cool read. And he's got, of course, he's kind of the father of Stoicism for a lot of different, one of them for Stoicism. So he's a very well-known person, but it's just really interesting read. If no one's read the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, I recommend it. It's really cool and simple. It's not very long either, read to go through.
Awesome. Well, next week, if you continue down this path, you'll be reading Ryan Holiday and some of the more modern versions of the Stoics, I would imagine.
I've got Ryan Holiday right here.
There it is.
This is actually a really, really good book too. The Daily Stoics is 365 days, almost like a little devotional type thing. 366, meditations, where he talks on Marcus Aurelius and a bunch of other people in there as well. But yeah, I like most of Ryan Holiday's stuff. Not all, but most.
I was gonna grab I have a copy of it as well, but I think it's in the nightstand, not in my office here. Cool. John, what are you geeking out over lately?
I've been geeking out over how we better understand the New Testament by understanding the Old Testament. So I'm a campus minister, and last night I got to teach on Acts 16, where Paul and Silas are in prison and their bondages are broken and they get freed basically, but they stay there. And if you read Psalm 18 and just read it in light of Acts 16, you will be like, oh my goodness, the correlation is crazy. It is actually pretty phenomenal. And I think they were singing hymns at the time, and I just can't help but think like they were probably singing Psalm 18 as soon as the earthquake started. Like that's probably what happened. Anyways, that's just a fun.
Psalm 18 and what chapter of Acts?
Acts 16.
Acts 16 and Psalm 18. I'll have to read it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Interesting, because that lines up kind of what Matthew was saying with Marcus Aurelius from 1,000 years ago. And we like to think that, that was a different world and they had different concerns and different issues. And no, they're still human. And the stuff that Marcus was dealing with is maybe just an uncluttered version of what we're dealing with. And you've got, Old Testament, New Testament, probably depending on where, maybe a couple thousand years, a couple hundred years, depending on what you're looking at. And some of the same themes tend to cross over. Maybe some universal truths both ways.
Yep.
That's cool. I've been geeking out. I like technology, but I get prone to distraction. I feel like the, like pursuing shiny or the squirrel reference from whatever Disney movie that is. But I've been playing around with screen time on the iPhone. And so going in and limiting social media to like 45 minutes a day. And that includes like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. It's amazing how I could open TikTok right before I go to bed. And then, 5 minutes of watching videos turns into 55 minutes and my sleep suffers. So it's pretty cool. It'll actually, once you hit your designated time limit, it'll actually pop up and block those apps. You can simply override it if you want. You can override it for a minute or 10 minutes, or just say, screw you, I'm going to override you. But that commitment you made with yourself before you started the day of only this much time, it'll then remind you when that's hit. The other thing I've done, maybe this will be helpful for Amazon sellers, is I've taken all of the sales-based metrics. So I've taken Stripe, which is our software tool, Amazon Seller app, which of course many of us open daily, and like YouTube metrics, and where I try and just monitor the channel. And I've actually limited that to 5 minutes a day. And so now if I get stuck in the middle of the day and I'm bored and I need a dopamine hit, and I pull open my Seller Central app to see what my sales are, once I've hit 5 minutes on the day, it says, hey, Caleb, this probably isn't the best use of your time. So I've been having fun with that. So if you haven't checked that out, do that. You can YouTube it or Google it or find a quick way to do it. But Apple does track that. And there's some really cool automations you can do within that I'm barely even scratching the surface on.
I was going to say, Caleb, on the flip side, if you want undistracted browsing, I believe there's a focus setting under settings. If you click on focus, you can set do not disturb to activate while you're on specific apps.
Ooh.
So that way, like if you're on TikTok and you don't want people to text you or call you to interrupt, you can have it automatically set up. I do it for Otter. You and I think that was on a previous Geek Out. Yeah, whenever Otter's on, whenever calls come in, it would break the recording up. And so it has it set where it automatically goes into do not disturb now.
Love it. I need to pick your brain. Every time we meet, you're talking about some sort of focus element that you've sorted out with iPhone. So I feel like I know this much of that space.
And I know like this much.
It's okay, we're going to jump into Q&A. We'll be brief. John, thank you for your time. I know you've got some little ones at home as well. And I do appreciate you sharing your time with all of us. Is there any way people can follow you if they want to see? I don't know if you share a lot of your business journey online, but is there any place people can track you down if they want to learn more?
We really don't share a whole lot of our business journey online. I am on Instagram, but I hardly ever post. But I think it's Troutman JA.
Perfect.
So yeah, you can find me there.
Troutman JA. John's a great guy just in general. If you're ever in the Boone area, there's a beautiful golf course. You can, I'm sure, probably bribe him with craft beer or a round of golf, and either one of those may cause him to step out and spend a little bit of time with you.
For sure.
All right, a couple Q&A. Again, you can direct them at any of the panelists, but specifically John. I haven't seen him sweat yet, so if you want to see John sweat, feel free to ask some tough questions, and we will wrap this show up in about 5 to 10 minutes. Somebody commented earlier, I'm sorry I missed this earlier, but I'm trying to hire more scouts for my team. I have some questions for Scout IQ support. How do I get in touch? We don't do phone support. We just can't afford to have someone sitting around the clock, but we do have very, very responsive email that John actually used to manage. I should probably admit that we still have your profile in our Zendesk support ticketing area. And every once in a while I log in as you. This is a secret, not anymore. Sometimes I log in as you and answer questions so it doesn't look like the owner is answering questions. So if anybody ever comes to you and says, thanks for answering the question, that's why.
I'll play along.
Perfect. That'd be great. But if you do want to email support, it's just support@scoutiq.co. That's the best way. Monica now manages support, and she can answer most any question you have. And if she can't, she's got our development team and the rest of us nearby through Slack, and we'll be able to answer that. So support@scoutiq.co. Happy to help you through those questions. We mentioned this at the beginning of the show, so flip and fade. You can go back. But John, you want to mention briefly? Has John been hit by restock limits? Do you do any merchant fulfillment?
Yes, I've been hit by restock limits, and our FBA is full right now. And so, yes, we do merchant fulfilled, and that's where we'll be focusing for now. We'll remove some items as well, but yeah.
Perfect. Tom Ransom, we met you in Atlanta last week, so good to see you on the show as well. John mentioned Amazon boots or kicks out some of the units when you're listing them. Can you just explain what that means?
Yeah, it's not on like they're receiving, it's as you're listing, depending on how you list. And then, so the way we do marketplace things is we actually will go in, and after everything's been listed, we'll go and reprice things. And as we reprice them, Amazon will come back and say, you can't list these items. And so it works out because we're submitting the spreadsheets into Amazon. They can say that on the front end. And so we can pull those out of those pallets. When you're using listing software, usually they're not 100% at catching those. Often they will. I know even Scout IQ, while you're scanning, will filter some out that are likely to be restricted anyways. So that's you just end up with those. I haven't figured out a way around it unless you're listing everything from a spreadsheet, which is not really what you want to do long term. So
the Amazon's new API, the SP API, it's a bit of a bear to put in, but one of the benefits it has is it will actually detect restrictions on your account. And so we've got that in Pallet IQ already, and that'll be finding its way to Scout IQ soon. So that'll be something that, Tom, to your question, every once in a while there's restricted books. If your listing software can't detect it, you'll send those in. They'll hit the warehouse. They'll go into stranded. You then have to decide to remove them, dispose of them, etc. But Amazon finally made this available in the API. You used to have to scrape or use Chrome extensions to sort this out properly, or just guess based on a wide range of data, which that's what we did on Scout IQ. But we'll be able to tie that directly to the individual seller moving forward, which is really nice. Junkman, I know what your answer is going to be, John. Anyone have a philosophy on selling Bibles / he didn't say it, but any religious material? Is it taboo to some people? Any comments there? Are there any books you won't sell, John?
There are books I won't sell. Usually books that are pornographic in nature, I just don't mess with. Which I don't think that's probably illegal anyways. But any ones that kind of suggest that, I'm like, we'll pass on that. I am all for selling Bibles. I figure like the more you can get them into people's hands, the better. So I'm all for it.
Perfect. Dave or Matthew, any books you won't sell as a general rule?
I've never run across a specific book. I'm like, ooh, I shouldn't sell this. I haven't run into one.
There's an interesting philosophy for booksellers that I guess was really promoted by the former owner of the Tattered Cover. So I guess you guys all have connection to that, it being in Denver. But Joyce, the previous owner, had a philosophy as a bookseller, which is you should not censor any books to anyone. So if anyone wants a book, they should have access to it no matter what. And I read an article just recently where, she would bring in new hires and she would ask them if a teenager comes in and they ask for a book called, How to Commit Suicide, do you sell that book to that kid? And, a lot of the new hires said, no, you shouldn't. But she said, no, you absolutely should. And that is your that is your duty as a bookseller. Now, I don't know, personally, if I could ascribe to that belief system, but it was just really interesting. As of right now, I don't think there are any books that I wouldn't sell, but definitely challenging. I know there are books that Amazon and eBay don't want you to sell, like books on, Nazi, and
Mein Kampf is one.
Mein Kampf and all that kind of stuff. But it's really interesting because I think increasingly so with book censoring going on, we're all connected to the book world, and at one point in time we should all ask ourselves, what is our responsibility as a bookseller? Do we censor anything? And I think everyone's free to come up with their own answer, but yeah.
I would just say if Amazon or some of the platforms will limit some of those. And again, I tend to be more on the free speech side of things and just free market, let things run their course. If someone wants to buy it, go ahead and pick it off. I don't think the platform should necessarily censor, although I understand why they do. In general, though, if that's something that's a moral issue for you and you don't feel like selling it, don't sell it. My warehouse guy and I differ a little bit. And sometimes there's books I'll sell and he's not comfortable selling. And we have to have the conversation that, my business, I'm making the rules. I will listen and get that. It's not a conversation that comes up that often. But if you don't feel great about it, if you're going to lose sleep, don't sell it. There's more important things than the almighty dollar. So kind of listen to your system. But it's kind of cool to see the both sides of the equation there. Well, I want to be sensitive of time. One fun fact, it just picked up on it again when you mentioned the Tattered Cover. All four of us used to live and reside in Denver, and it being the great melting pot and sifting area as well. We've all kind of scattered. Dave is the OG. He'd been there longer than the rest of us. He's still there. The wind cannot blow him away. But John has scattered to North Carolina. I'm in Indiana. Matthew's in Arizona. So kind of a fun fact that we all sort of stayed, all met there and then, vanished or dispersed. So John, thank you for being here. Thanks for being on episode 19. Everybody, we do these typically every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern. So set reminders. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all of those good things. And with that, we'll say one final cheers and let you all get back to your regularly scheduled afternoons. So
cheers.
Thank you.